The second one is good news. And then I have surprising. There was one very surprising element I found. And then I want to comment on the banks, because he actually talked a lot about the banks in the budget speech, although there really wasn't any particular announcement about the banks. Obviously the budget didn't have anything to do with the banks. Okay, so quickly through the not surprising. I'm sure most of you have heard some of this already. A reduction in income tax bans and credits of 10%, and that's going to affect us all, I'm sure. One thing that he did clearly say is that that reduction does not bring the lowest paid into the tax net. So for those who are on minimum wage, that will be reduced. They will still be out of the tax net. Removal of the PRSI ceiling, we're all expecting that. So that's particularly going to affect people over 75,000. Removal of many allowances, including after 2014, all allowances to do with property. Cuts in public sector pensions, those that get pensions of over €12,000 are going to be cut by 4% on average. Welfare and pensions, there's no reduction in the state pension as we would all expected. The working age payments go down 4%, and I assume what he means by that, he used this term working age pensions as unemployment benefits, single mothers, that kind of thing. This might affect many of you. Child benefit goes down €10 for the first, €10 for the first child and €20 for the third child. That's actually a lot less than I was expecting. I don't know about you guys with children. Maybe you're actually pleased that it's not larger than that. There's labour market activation measures. I love these terms. Aren't they fantastic? Supports for the unemployed, not really strong. He announced 15,000 places in various work programs. Air travel tax down to €3, and that's very good news for a woman I just met, Fanula, from the Tourism Island. She was very pleased with that. Although I was actually amused to hear him, he really read the riot act to the airlines in the budget speech, saying, this will be revised at the end of 2011, so you guys behave yourselves. Down to the good news. Yay! Looks like, according to Brian Cowen, we're officially out of recession, because he says in 2010, that's what he said, in 2010, we're going to have a small growth. We're going to report a small growth. He didn't say what. The other bit of good news is the reduction in pay of the Taoiseach and ministers. And what he claimed was that for ministers, they were going to take another 10,000 pay cut, which was going to take their overall reduction to 60,000. And for the Taoiseach, another 14,000, an overall reduction to date of 90,000. I mean, that's quite a lot of money. I don't know where the starting point was exactly.
Too high.
Obviously. On that point, something I've been noticing about looking at the TV shots of the Dáil, in the last year, I've really noticed this, and I can't comment on the men, but the women, they have such beautiful gear, and they've always got new gear, new clothes on. And maybe I'm taking notice of this because we've had lots of pay cuts in the public sector, and that includes us. Most of us can barely afford to buy new clothes, and yet they always have this beautiful new gear all the time. So you had Mary Hannafin there with this beautiful new green jacket. I don't notice these things, I'm sorry. And the Taoiseach there with this lovely, just beautifully tailored sort of pink twin set. I'm not sure pink is really the right colour to wear today, but anyway. Okay, the other good news is, of course, the 12.5% corporate tax rate stays, as we were all expecting. I was interested by his wording, and this is exactly what he said verbatim. We will defend our 12.5% corporate tax rate against all comers. So there you go. Business expansion scheme, that's a scheme for small businesses, is to be renamed the Employment and Investment Scheme, and that's to reflect a greater emphasis, apparently, on the creation of jobs in small business. Okay, I guess for those of you that work in the private sector, this is good news. Maximum salary in the public sector is going to be €250,000. And it looks like he claimed he's going to try and get the semi-state pay down as well, although he couldn't make any promises on that, as we all know, contractual reasons. Okay, so we're up to surprising, and this was a surprise. Do you know what I'm about to say? Stamp duty. I was really surprised. So a flat rate of 1% up to €1 million And beyond that, 2%. But it steps up from 1 to 2. So the first 1 million will be 1, and then above that 2%. This, I think, is really good news. And a couple of years ago, I was on one of the RTE programs, business programs, and I actually made this comment that stamp duty was a huge problem, and it really has had very little coverage. Because to me, part of the issue is, with our banks, is that its property is the problem, of course, as we know. And yet, you have this ridiculous stamp duty regime that's actually preventing liquidity in the property markets. So, hopefully, this move will actually perhaps bring new buyers in, create a bit more liquidity in the markets, and perhaps, hopefully, put some sort of floor on the property market, because the property market is still falling. As long as it keeps falling, our banks are going to just keep totting up new bad debts, as we know. So I actually think that's really good news, and very surprising. Okay, I wanted to talk a little bit about the banks. He actually said in his speech that over the period 2008 to 2012, the banks will have lost 70 to 80 billion. But he insisted that it's not just the taxpayers bearing that, because obviously the shareholders already have, because pretty much shareholders are fairly well wiped out. AIB shareholders are well on their way to being wiped out, I would say. Bank of Ireland maybe will remain with a little bit of value. And he also commented, of course, subordinated bondholders, are going to be bearing the losses. He talked about the limits to burden sharing, and of course what he was mentioning here was the senior bondholders. We can't renege on senior bondholders, he said. Our European partners basically say so. He didn't say it in those words, of course. This is a very serious issue, I think, and it's an issue I've been thinking about a lot lately. This idea of reneging, or at least partial default on senior bondholders. In my opinion, particularly for Anglo, it really has to happen, and probably will. It probably will. And the reason that, supposedly, we've all heard this, haven't we, that the reason we can't is because the Europeans, the EU, and the ECB were preventing us. The IMF actually wanted us to in these negotiations. We split, the ECB said no, and Europe said no. Now, I was very, very interested in this, and when Mr. Chopra came on the radio, it was actually last Monday week. I don't know if you heard him, he was on Morning Island last Monday week. And it was a fascinating interview. He was using very careful language in relation to the senior bondholders. After a series of questions where he repeated a few times this phrase, "That's all the program contains for now," the question was, and I've got this verbatim, would the IMF have preferred a solution that saw senior bondholders make a contribution? Is that something you think will arise again? And Chopra said, "That's very difficult to say. We will have to see how this program evolves. Various opinions will need to be kept on the table, and we'll just have to see how things go." That gives me a lot of hope, actually. Obviously, the IMF is really going to keep pressing this point. And in my opinion, if we don't default on Anglo, at the very least, then we're going to end up defaulting overall, I think. So this issue will have to be dealt with, and I'm optimistic that it will. So we know in the next 2 or 3 months, the announcement from the IMF, the ECB and EU being here was that they were going to take 2 or 3 months to actually go carefully through the books of the banks, get consultants in. I think there'll have to be a revolution in the banking sector, and I think that will happen. And I think we end up